My mother-in-law faked a fall when we announced moving, demanding we stay or have her death on our conscience. My husband and I had been planning our escape from his mother's clutches for 2 years. We'd saved every penny, hidden job applications, even used a friend's address for mail because Riley monitors everything that comes to our house. Yes, we live with her. Have for 5 years since my husband Tommy lost his job, and she insisted we move in temporarily to save money. That was the trap. Once we were in, she made it impossible to leave. Every time we mentioned apartments, she'd have a health crisis. Chest pains when we toured a place, vertigo when we tried to sign a lease, a mysterious allergic reaction when movers were scheduled. We fell for it every time until my sister, a nurse, pointed out that Riley's symptoms only appeared when we tried to leave and mysteriously vanished the moment we canceled our plans. So this time, we did everything in secret. I got a job transfer to Seattle, 3,000 miles away. Tommy lined up remote work. We put a deposit on an apartment, hired movers for when Riley would be at her weekly bridge club. We planned to tell her the morning of, giving her no time to orchestrate a crisis. But Riley must have sensed something because she started laying groundwork weeks before. "I've been so dizzy lately," she'd say, gripping furniture as she walked. "My doctor says it's my blood pressure. Very dangerous at my age." She started leaving medical pamphlets about sudden cardiac death in the elderly around the house. Subtle. Last night, we couldn't wait anymore. The movers were coming in 3 days. We sat her down after dinner. "Mom, we have something to tell you," Tommy started. "We've accepted jobs in Seattle. We're moving on Saturday." The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then Riley stood up, clutched her chest, and collapsed. Not a gentle sink to the ground. A full theatrical collapse, knocking over a lamp on the way down. "Mom!" Tommy rushed to her. I called 911, though I noticed she was peeking through her eyelashes to see if we were watching. The paramedics arrived and found nothing wrong. Blood pressure normal, heart rate steady, no signs of distress except her insistence that she felt death approaching. At the hospital, she grabbed Tommy's hand. "If you leave, I'll die. I can feel it. You'll have my death on your conscience forever." The doctor pulled us aside. "Your mother is perfectly healthy. There's nothing physically wrong with her." But Riley heard this and immediately changed tactics. "It's not physical," she moaned. "It's a mother's intuition. I know if you leave, something terrible will happen to me. I'll be dead within a week." She actually convinced Tommy to consider staying. That night, he said, "What if she's right? What if something happens? Tommy, she's manipulating you. But what if she dies?" "She won't die." But doubt crept in. What if she was so depressed by our leaving that she hurt herself? What if she accidentally took too many pills? Could we live with that? The next morning, Riley was in fine form. She'd called Tommy's entire family, telling them we were abandoning her to die alone. His sister called screaming that we were heartless monsters. His aunt said we'd be murderers. His cousin actually flew in from Phoenix to say goodbye to Grandma before you kill her. Riley held court from her bed like a dying queen, telling everyone how she'd collapsed from grief, how the doctor said her heart couldn't take the strain of us leaving. "The doctor said you're fine," I corrected. "They don't understand a mother's heart," she replied, then clutched her chest again when Tommy entered. "I need to make my will. I won't last the week once you're gone." By evening, 17 family members were in our living room, staging an intervention about our elder abuse. Riley had somehow convinced them all she was dying of abandonment. Tommy was cracking. "Maybe we should postpone." "No," I stood up. "We're leaving Saturday. Riley is not dying. She's manipulating everyone." Riley gasped, clutched her chest, and fell off the couch. This time she hit her head on the coffee table. Real blood. Everyone screamed. Back to the hospital. This time, a different doctor. Dr. Kim. While they were stitching Riley's head, Dr. Kim pulled me aside. "I need to show you something." She brought me to her office and pulled up Riley's medical records. "Your mother-in-law has been to the ER 43 times in 5 years. Always when family members travel or move. Look at the dates." I looked. Every single visit corresponded with someone trying to leave. Tommy's brother's wedding in Hawaii. His sister moving to Portland. Our attempted apartment viewings. "But that's not the interesting part," Dr. Kim continued. "Look at this." She pulled up another file. Insurance claims. Riley had been billing these visits to insurance as accidents, collecting disability payments. "This is fraud," Dr. Kim said. "But there's more. I ran her prescription history. Your mother-in-law has been stockpiling medication, specifically medications that in combination could induce symptoms mimicking heart problems or strokes. She's been planning something." My blood went cold. "Planning what?" Dr. Kim looked grim. "Based on the quantities and timing, if you had actually left on Saturday." She paused. "I believe she was planning to take them. Not enough to kill herself, but enough to be found dying and blame you." I stared at the records. She was going to fake a suicide attempt? Or make it look like you leaving caused a real medical emergency. Either way, you'd come back. And probably never try to leave again. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from Riley's neighbor. "Saw your MIL hiding something in her garage yesterday. Looked like medical equipment. Thought you should know." Dr. Kim stood up. "I have to report the insurance fraud. But you should check that garage. Tonight." before she gets released. It's 9 p.m. now. Tommy's still at the hospital with his mother. I'm in my car outside our house. I have the garage key in my hand. I'm terrified of what I'm going to find. My phone just buzzed. It's Tommy. Mom just told the nurse she has a confession. Says she's been hiding something big. She wants to tell the whole family. She's demanding everyone come to the hospital now. Another text from Riley's neighbor. Someone just pulled up to your house. They're going into the garage. I look up. The garage door is opening, but I can't see who's inside. Lucy Thornton stood in the garage doorway with her phone held up at shoulder height, the screen still glowing from recording mode. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set in that way people get when they've decided they're going to do something difficult, no matter how scared they are. Ralph stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, both of them breathing hard like they'd been running. Lucy's voice came out shaky but clear when she spoke. Someone had just gone through the back gate carrying a large box, maybe 2 minutes before I pulled up. She got the license plate number before the person drove away. She showed me her phone, and there it was. A clear photo of a dark sedan's rear plate. I saved the image to my phone and forwarded it to Dr. Kim immediately. Then Lucy led me into the garage and I had to stop walking because my brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. A full hospital bed sat against the far wall, the kind with railings and adjustment controls. Fake IV equipment hung on a rolling stand next to it, complete with bags of clear liquid that looked convincing until you got close enough to see they were just water. Printed medical charts covered a folding table, all of them with Riley's name at the top and fabricated symptoms documented in neat handwriting. But the folder is what made my hands start shaking. Emergency Protocol Saturday was printed on the label in Riley's careful script. I opened it with Lucy and Ralph looking over my shoulder. Inside were instructions so detailed they could have been a military operation plan. What time to take which medications for maximum dramatic effect without actual danger. Which symptoms to display and in what order. How to time the crisis for exactly when the movers would be loading our furniture. There were even contingency plans if we tried to leave anyway, including a backup scenario involving an ambulance call timed to arrive at our new apartment building in Seattle. She'd researched the nearest hospital to our new place. She'd mapped out how long it would take Tommy to fly back. She'd calculated everything. Ralph pulled out his phone and called the police while Lucy and I started taking pictures of everything. My hands were shaking, so badly I had to brace my phone against my body to keep the photos from blurring. There was a calendar on the wall that made me feel sick to look at. 5 years of family events were marked in different colored pens. Tommy's brother's wedding in Hawaii had a red star and a note that said, chest pains and ambulance. His sister moving to Portland got a blue circle with vertigo and fall written next to it. Our apartment viewings were marked in green with various symptoms listed. Every single time someone in this family had tried to leave or travel or do anything independent, Riley had orchestrated a medical crisis. The pattern was so clear it looked like evidence from a police investigation. I counted 43 marked events total, which matched exactly what Dr. Kim had shown me in the hospital records. Lucy kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over while she photographed the calendar. Ralph was still on the phone with the police, explaining what we'd found, his voice getting more urgent as he described the medications and the equipment. My phone started ringing and I saw Tommy's name on the screen. I answered and he started talking immediately, his words coming fast. Riley had just made her big confession at the hospital in front of the whole family. She'd gathered everyone into her room and announced with tears streaming down her face that she'd been secretly dying of a terminal illness for months. She said she didn't want to burden anyone with the knowledge, so she'd been suffering in silence. She said the stress of us leaving had made her symptoms worse, and she probably only had weeks left to live. She wanted everyone to know the truth before she died alone. Tommy's voice cracked when he told me this part because I could hear he'd almost believed her again. But then Dr. Kim had walked in during Riley's performance. Dr. Kim had Riley's latest blood work results in her hand, and she'd pulled Tommy aside to show him. Every single test came back normal. No terminal illness, no hidden cancer, no mysterious condition. Riley was in perfect health for a woman her age. Dr. Kim had actually said those exact words in front of the entire family. Riley tried to claim the doctors were wrong, that she could feel death approaching, that medical tests don't show everything. But Tommy said something in him finally broke when he watched his mother try to sell that story, while Dr. Kim stood there with the actual lab results. He said he just felt tired of the fear and the guilt and the constant crises. He asked me where I was, and I told him to stay at the hospital, that I was coming to him with evidence he needed to see. I ended the call and looked at Lucy and Ralph. They both nodded without me having to ask. We would all go to the hospital together. They would come as witnesses to what we'd found. Ralph finished his call with the police, and they said an officer would meet us at the hospital since that's where Riley currently was. We locked the garage, and I took one last photo of the whole setup before we left. The image on my phone screen looked like something from a crime show, not something from my real life. Lucy drove her car, and Ralph rode with her while I drove mine, following their taillights through dark streets toward the hospital. My mind kept circling back to that folder, those detailed instructions, the backup plans. Riley hadn't just been manipulating us in the moment. She'd been planning and strategizing and documenting her methods. This wasn't desperation or fear of abandonment. This was systematic control. The hospital parking lot was fuller than I expected for 9:30 at night. I found a spot near the emergency entrance and waited for Lucy and Ralph to the park. We walked in together and the waiting room hit me like a wall of tension. Tommy's relatives filled every available seat and stood in clusters along the walls. 17 people had shown up for the intervention at our house earlier. Now there looked like even more. Word must have spread about Riley's terminal illness confession, but the mood in the room felt different from before. People weren't crying or comforting each other. They looked confused and uncomfortable, whispering in small groups with worried expressions. Nobody was looking at their phones or making small talk. The whole room had the feeling of people waiting for bad news but not knowing what kind. Prudence stood apart from everyone else near the hallway that led to the patient rooms. Her arms were crossed tight over her chest and she was staring at Riley's room door with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something that looked like she was doing math in her head and not liking the numbers she was getting. Dr. Kim spotted me as soon as I walked in and came over immediately. She pulled me aside to a quiet corner near the vending machines. She spoke in a low voice that wouldn't carry. She'd reported the insurance fraud to the state investigator after our earlier conversation. They were sending someone tonight to interview Riley. It was happening faster than normal because the amount of fraud was significant, and because Riley was currently in the hospital making false medical claims. Dr. Kim pulled a folded paper from her pocket and unfolded it for me to see. It was a printed summary of all 43 emergency room visits over 5 years. The left column showed dates. The right column showed which family member had been trying to leave or travel. Every single date matched. Tommy's brother's wedding, Prudence's move to Phoenix, our apartment viewings, other relatives' vacations and job transfers. The pattern was so obvious that even someone who knew nothing about our family would see it immediately. Dr. Kim had highlighted the dates in yellow and drawn lines connecting them. She said she'd given copies to the investigator and to the hospital administration. She said what Riley had been doing had a name in medical settings. Factitious disorder imposed on self for secondary gain. Basically, faking illness to manipulate others and collect benefits. It was a recognized form of abuse. I thanked Dr. Kim and asked if I could go to Riley's room. She nodded and said most of the family was already in there or just outside. I walked down the hallway with Lucy and Ralph following me. The door to Riley's room stood half open and I could see inside. Riley sat propped up in the hospital bed looking perfectly healthy, her color good and her movements normal. Tommy stood near the window with his hands in his pockets. His Aunt Caitlin sat in the visitor chair. His cousin from Phoenix leaned against the wall. 3 other relatives crowded near the foot of the bed. Everyone looked up when I walked in. Riley's eyes locked on mine and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe? Or calculation. She knew I'd been somewhere. She knew something had changed. Then she clutched her chest with both hands and started gasping for air. Her mouth opened wide and she made choking sounds. Her face twisted in what was supposed to look like pain. But this time Tommy didn't rush to her side. He just stood by the window watching her with a strange expression on his face. Like he was seeing a magic trick performed and finally noticing the wires and mirrors. Like something that had always worked before suddenly looked fake and obvious. Riley kept gasping, but nobody moved toward her. The relatives exchanged glances, but nobody called for a nurse. After about 15 seconds of this, Riley's performance started to falter. The gasping got quieter. Her hands slowly lowered from her chest. She opened her eyes and looked around the room at all of us just standing there watching her. Her face went from pained to confused to angry in quick succession. She stopped gasping completely and sat up straighter in the bed. Her voice came out sharp when she spoke, demanding to know why everyone was just standing there staring at her. Didn't anyone care that she was dying? Didn't anyone believe her? Prudence stepped forward from where she'd been standing in the doorway. Her voice came out quiet, but it cut through the room. She said she wanted to know about the emergency room visit that happened the week before Prudence's wedding in Hawaii. She said she'd been looking at her old calendar and the dates matched up perfectly. Riley had her mysterious fall that required Prudence to cancel her honeymoon on the exact day Prudence's plane tickets were booked. Prudence wanted to know if that was a coincidence. I pulled out my phone and opened the video Lucy had taken in the garage. I walked over to Riley's bed table and set my phone down where everyone could see the screen. Then I pressed play. The video showed everything. The hospital bed with fake equipment, the printed medical charts, the calendar marking family departures with corresponding medical emergencies. The emergency protocol Saturday folder laid open with its detailed instructions visible. Lucy's voice on the video reading some of the instructions out loud. The backup plans for if we left anyway. The medication combinations. All of it. The room went completely silent except for Lucy's voice coming from my phone speaker. I watched Riley's face while the video played. Shock first, her eyes going wide and her mouth opening. Then anger, her jaw clenching and her hands gripping the hospital blanket. Then something calculating slid across her features as she realized she'd been caught, but started thinking about how to spin this. How to make this look like something other than what it obviously was. The video ended and I picked up my phone. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Riley started crying. Real tears this time, streaming down her face and making her mascara run. Her voice came out broken and desperate. She said she was so sorry. She said she'd made terrible mistakes. She said she was so desperately afraid of losing her family that she'd done things she shouldn't have done. But it all came from a place of love. It all came from fear of abandonment. She couldn't bear the thought of being alone. Didn't that count for something? Didn't love excuse mistakes? She looked at Tommy with her eyes pleading. Tommy's Aunt Caitlin made a soft sound and her expression started to soften. She said everyone makes mistakes when they're scared of being alone. She said fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. She started to stand up like she was going to go comfort Riley. But then someone knocked on the door frame and we all turned to look. A man in a dark suit stepped into the light, holding a badge wallet open. He looked to be in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. His partner followed behind him, a younger woman with a tablet in her hands. The man spoke first and said his name was Steve Bailey from the Insurance Fraud Investigation Unit. He asked if Riley Thornton was in the room and if he could speak with her privately about some disability claims. Dr. Kim stepped forward immediately and said any conversation needed to happen with medical staff present due to Riley's claimed health conditions. She gestured to the monitors still attached to Riley and explained they needed to ensure the patient's safety during questioning. Steve nodded and said that was fine. They just needed to ask some questions. Riley's face went from pink to white in about 3 seconds. Her hands gripped the hospital blanket and her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Tommy, then at me, then back at Steve like she was trying to figure out which direction the danger was coming from. Steve's partner set up a small recording device on the table next to Riley's bed and stated the date and time for the record. Steve pulled out a folder thick with papers and sat down in the chair next to Riley's bed. He explained they were investigating disability claims totaling over $70,000 that Riley had collected over 5 years. The number hit me like cold water. $70,000. Steve started listing specific claims from his papers. A back injury in 2019 that supposedly prevented Riley from working and required home care assistance. Chronic vertigo in 2020 that made it unsafe for her to be alone. A cardiac condition in 2021 that needed monitoring and support. Respiratory problems in 2022. Joint deterioration in 2023. Each claim had resulted in disability payments, home care reimbursements, medical equipment coverage. Steve looked up from his papers and said none of these conditions appeared in Riley's actual medical files from her regular doctors. The only documentation was from emergency room visits, and even those records showed normal test results. Riley started to speak, but Steve held up his hand. He said they'd pulled her prescription history and found she'd been getting medications from multiple pharmacies, some of which could induce the symptoms she claimed to have. They'd also found she'd been billing insurance for home care services that neighbors reported never actually happened. No home care workers were ever seen at her address during the periods she claimed to need constant assistance. Tommy stood up from where he'd been leaning against the wall. His voice came out rough and shaky when he asked his mother directly if she'd been faking disability to collect insurance money while preventing us from leaving. Riley clutched her chest and gasped, her eyes going wide. Steve said calmly that he was recording this conversation and that false medical claims during an investigation would add more fraud charges to what she was already facing. Riley's hand dropped from her chest. She looked at Steve, then at the recording device, then at all of us watching her. Her face showed about 5 different emotions in 10 seconds, before settling on something that looked almost like relief, mixed with fear. The room stayed quiet for maybe 30 seconds. Then Prudence spoke up from where she'd been standing near the door. She said she wanted to tell everyone about Riley's mysterious fall 3 years ago, the one that happened 2 days before Prudence's honeymoon to Greece. Riley had called crying about falling down the stairs and hurting her back so badly she couldn't move. Prudence and her new husband had canceled their trip and flown home to take care of her. Prudence had taken a week off work to stay at Riley's house, cooking and cleaning and helping her mother to the bathroom. Then Prudence's neighbor, who lived next door to Riley, mentioned at a barbecue that summer that she'd seen Riley walking normally to her car that same week, carrying heavy grocery bags from the store without any problem. Prudence said she'd convinced herself the neighbor must have been confused about the dates. Now she knew better. Tommy's cousin spoke up next. He said Riley had a supposed allergic reaction 5 years ago, right when he was supposed to accept a job transfer to Denver. She'd eaten something at a family dinner and her throat had started closing up, or so she claimed. The ambulance came and found nothing wrong, but she'd been so scared and upset that Tommy's cousin had turned down the transfer to stay close to family. Another relative, Tommy's aunt on his father's side, described a fainting spell that happened on the morning of her daughter's college graduation. Riley had fainted in the parking lot of the graduation venue, and everyone had to rush her to the hospital instead of watching the ceremony. The doctors found nothing wrong, but Riley had insisted someone needed to stay with her overnight. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone in the room. Every time someone in the family tried to do something independent or move away or celebrate a personal achievement, Riley had a medical crisis that pulled focus back to her. The crises were always dramatic enough to derail plans, but never serious enough to show up on actual medical tests. Tommy's sister started crying and said she'd moved to Portland specifically to get away from the guilt trips, but she'd felt terrible about it for years. She'd thought she was abandoning her mother when her mother needed her most. Now she realized the need had been manufactured. Riley looked around at all of us and her expression changed again. She said she would confess everything and make it right if Tommy promised not to abandon her. She said she'd pay back the money and get help and do whatever was needed, but she couldn't lose her son. She reached for Tommy's hand, but he pulled away. His voice was shaking when he spoke, but the words came out firm and clear. He said he wasn't abandoning her. He said he was choosing his marriage and his own life, and those were not the same thing. He said she'd taught him that love meant sacrifice, but what she'd actually taught him was that love meant control. Real love didn't require him to give up his future. Real love didn't involve manipulation and fraud and trapping people with fake medical emergencies. His hands were trembling, but he kept talking. He said he loved her, but he couldn't save her from herself, and he couldn't let her destroy his marriage trying. Riley's face crumpled and she started crying again, but this time it looked different. Less performed, more genuine. Steve cleared his throat and said Riley needed to come to the investigation office tomorrow morning to provide a formal statement. He handed her a paper with a list of all the fraudulent claims they were investigating. The list was 2 pages long. At the bottom was a number showing the total amount she'd collected through false claims. $93,000 when you were included the home care billing fraud. The amount she'd need to repay was staggering. Steve said she should bring documentation of all medical claims and treatments, and she should probably bring a lawyer. His partner packed up the recording equipment and they both stood to leave. Steve gave Riley a business card and said someone from their office would be in touch about the criminal investigation timeline. After Steve and his partner left, Dr. Kim came back into the room with discharge papers. She said there was nothing medically wrong with Riley and no reason to keep her in the hospital. She handed Riley information about therapists who specialized in family manipulation patterns and said she strongly recommended Riley start treatment immediately. The family started dispersing into small groups in the waiting room. Some people left entirely. Others stood around talking in low voices, processing what they'd just learned. Caitlin was crying in the corner. Tommy's cousin was on his phone, presumably telling his wife what had happened. Prudence stood near the nurse's station looking exhausted. I found Tommy sitting alone in a corner chair near the vending machines. He was staring at nothing, his hands folded in his lap. I sat down beside him without saying anything. We sat there for maybe 5 minutes while people moved around us. Finally, Tommy spoke. He said he'd been thinking about his entire childhood and seeing it differently now. Every time he'd wanted to do something independent, there had been a crisis. When he'd wanted to go to college out of state, Riley had developed mysterious chest pains that required him to stay local. When he'd gotten his first serious girlfriend in his early 20s, Riley had started having fainting spells that made the girlfriend uncomfortable about their future together. They'd broken up. When he'd gotten the job offer that would have required moving to another city, Riley had fallen and hurt her hip, or claimed to. Every girlfriend before me had somehow caused Riley health problems. Every career opportunity had somehow threatened her well-being. He said he felt like his entire life had been built around managing his mother's fake crises, and he didn't know who he would have been without that constant background noise of guilt and obligation. He sounded exhausted and heartbroken. Lucy appeared next to us and said she and Ralph wanted to offer something. She said they'd stay at our house tonight as witnesses in case Riley tried anything when we all returned home. She said they'd sleep in the guest room and just be there as neutral observers to make sure nothing happened. Prudence overheard from where she was standing nearby. She walked over and said she'd stay too. Not to defend her mother, she clarified, but to make sure Tommy and I were safe. She said she'd been complicit in Riley's manipulation for too long by staying away and not questioning the pattern. The shift in family alliances was dramatic and disorienting. People who'd been screaming at us about elder abuse 2 days ago were now offering to protect us from Riley. We get back to the house close to midnight and Riley walks straight upstairs without saying anything to anyone. Her bedroom door closes and within seconds I hear her voice through the walls, talking on the phone. Lucy leans close to me and whispers that maybe we should look in Riley's room while we have the chance, see what else she might be hiding. Tommy shakes his head immediately and says he can't do that. He can't go through his mother's private things even after everything that happened tonight. Prudence stands up from the couch and says she'll do it then. She doesn't have the same problem with boundaries that Tommy has. She goes upstairs and we hear Riley's voice get louder for a second. Then Prudence must have gone into a different room because it gets quiet again. Ralph makes coffee in the kitchen and Lucy sits next to Tommy on the couch, not saying anything but just being there. I pace back and forth in the living room because I can't sit still. My brain keeps going over everything we found in the garage and everything Dr. Kim showed us at the hospital. 20 minutes pass and then Prudence comes back downstairs carrying a metal lockbox. She sets it on the coffee table and opens it, and inside are stacks of papers organized with colored tabs. She pulls out the first section and spreads the papers across the table. Bank statements with our names on them. Job applications I sent months ago. Printed emails between me and my sister about our escape plans. Tommy picks up one of the emails and his hands start shaking as he reads it. Riley has been monitoring everything for years, printing out our private conversations and filing them away like evidence in a case against us. There are notes in the margins in Riley's handwriting, comments about our plans and strategies for stopping us. One note next to my job application to Seattle says, increase medical episodes, target Tommy's guilt response. Another note next to an email about apartment deposits says, stage fall, ensure witnesses present. Prudence pulls out another section from the lockbox, and this time it's a journal, the kind with a leather cover and a ribbon bookmark. She opens it and starts reading out loud. The first entry she reads is from 3 years ago, and it's about Tommy's brother trying to move to California for a job. Riley wrote down which symptoms she used, how long she stayed in the hospital, and whether it worked to stop him from leaving. There's a rating system where she scores each manipulation attempt from 1 to 10 based on how effective it was. She gave the California incident a 9 because his brother postponed the move for 6 months. The next entry Prudence reads is about me, from when Tommy and I first talked about getting our own apartment. Riley wrote that I'm harder to manipulate than Tommy because I question her symptoms, so she needs to focus her efforts on Tommy and make him feel responsible for her health. There are pages and pages of entries like this, documenting every time someone in the family tried to be independent and exactly how Riley stopped them. She has notes about which relatives are easiest to control, ranked from most to least susceptible. Tommy is at the top of the list. Prudence is at the bottom with a note that says, resistant, moved away, minimal contact, consider lost cause. There are entries about Tommy's cousins, his aunts and uncles, even his late father before he died. Reading it feels like finding out your whole life was a game someone else was playing, with rules you never knew existed and moves you never saw coming. Lucy points to an entry from 2 months ago, and Prudence reads it out loud. Riley wrote that she suspected we were planning something big because Tommy seemed distant lately, and I was too cheerful, like I had a secret. She wrote that she needed to start preparing her Saturday emergency protocol early, just in case. The entry includes research notes about medication combinations, which ones would create convincing symptoms without actually being dangerous. She listed side effects she wanted to fake and which medications would produce them. There are dosage calculations and timing notes about when to take what pills for maximum dramatic effect. She even wrote about practicing her collapse technique in front of the mirror to make it look more realistic. The level of planning is scary, like she's been treating our lives as some kind of project she needed to manage and control. Tommy picks up the journal and flips through it until he finds entries about himself. He reads silently for a minute and then his face just crumbles. Tears start running down his cheeks and his whole body shakes. He shows me the entry and I read it over his shoulder. Riley wrote that Tommy is the easiest to control because she trained him from birth to put her feelings above his own needs. She wrote that she made sure he learned early that his independence caused her pain, so now he automatically feels guilty whenever he tries to do something for himself. She described specific techniques she used when he was a child, ways she taught him to associate his happiness with her suffering. It's written so casually, like she's describing a recipe or a craft project. She actually wrote the words, trained him from birth, like he's a dog she was teaching tricks. Tommy makes this sound like all the air is leaving his body, and he drops the journal on the floor. I put my arms around him and he just falls apart, crying in a way I've never seen before. His whole life is rewriting itself in his head right now, every memory taking on a different meaning. Prudence sits down on his other side and puts her hand on his shoulder. She says quietly that she moved to Phoenix specifically to get away from their mother's control, but she's felt terrible about it ever since. She says she knew something was wrong with how Riley treated them, but she couldn't name it, couldn't explain it to anyone, including herself. She says watching Riley manipulate Tommy over the years helped her feel better about keeping her distance, like at least she escaped even if he didn't. Her voice cracks when she says she should have helped him see it sooner, should have said something instead of just running away and leaving him behind. Ralph brings Tommy a glass of water and sits in the chair across from us, and Lucy moves closer on the couch. We all just sit there while Tommy cries and tries to process 30-something years of psychological abuse he's only now understanding was abnormal. Around 2 in the morning, we hear footsteps upstairs and then sounds of drawers opening and closing. Ralph stands up and says he'll go check what's happening. He goes upstairs and we hear him talking to Riley, his voice getting louder. He comes back down a minute later and says Riley is packing a suitcase, claiming she's going to stay with Caitlin for a few days to give everyone space. But Ralph noticed she's not just packing clothes, she's packing our important documents and some valuable things from around the house. I run upstairs with Tommy and Prudence right behind me. Riley is in her room with a suitcase open on the bed, and inside I can see our birth certificates, our social security cards, the title to our car. She's also packed some of her expensive jewelry and a small painting from the hallway that Tommy's grandmother left him. I walk over and start taking our documents out of her suitcase. Riley tries to grab them back and says she's just keeping them safe, that we're too upset right now to be trusted with important papers. I tell her she's not taking anything that belongs to us, and Tommy backs me up even though his voice is shaking. Riley switches tactics and says the jewelry and painting are hers to do with as she wants, but Ralph points out that the painting was specifically left to Tommy in his grandmother's will. Lucy comes upstairs with her phone and starts taking pictures of everything Riley tried to pack, saying we need evidence of this continued deceptive behavior. Riley looks at all of us standing there against her and something changes in her face. The manipulation attempts stop and she just looks tired and small. She takes her hands off the suitcase and sits down on the edge of her bed without saying anything else. The next morning my phone rings and it's Steve Bailey asking if we can come to his office with any additional evidence we've found. I tell him about the journal and the lockbox and he says to bring everything. He wants to see it all. Tommy and I drive to the insurance investigation office with Prudence following in her rental car. Lucy gave us a thumb drive with all the photos she took in the garage and of Riley's suitcase. Steve's office is in a plain building downtown with fluorescent lights and gray carpet. He meets us in a conference room and spreads everything out on the table. He reads through the journal entries while his partner makes copies of our financial documents from the lockbox. Steve's face gets more and more serious as he reads. After about an hour, he looks up and says, "This is one of the most systematic fraud cases he's investigated in 20 years of doing this work." He says most fraud is opportunistic, people taking advantage of situations as they come up. But Riley's journal shows years of deliberate planning and manipulation, a whole system she created and refined over time. Steve opens a folder and pulls out more papers, spreading them next to the journal. He says Riley's fraud goes way beyond the disability insurance claims. She also filed false claims for home care services she never received, billing insurance for nurses and physical therapists who never came to the house. She claimed she needed medical equipment like a hospital bed and wheelchair, got insurance to pay for them, then returned the equipment for cash refunds while telling insurance she was still using it. And here's the worst part, Steve says. Riley claimed Tommy and I as her dependent caregivers to get additional benefits, saying she needed full-time care and we were providing it. She got monthly payments for our supposed caregiver services while we were actually paying her rent to live in her house. She was literally getting paid to keep us trapped there. I look at the paper where Steve has written down the total. $90,000. The number sits there on the page and I can't make sense of it at first because it's so much money. Steve taps his pen on the folder and says, "This changes everything. With fraud at this level, the state prosecutor will definitely file criminal charges. Riley isn't just facing repayment anymore. She's looking at potential jail time." He explains that insurance fraud over $50,000 is a felony, and with Riley's systematic planning documented in her journal, the prosecutor will push for serious consequences. The jail time depends on whether Riley cooperates with the investigation and shows genuine remorse, but Steve says even with cooperation, she's facing years of probation minimum and possibly actual prison time. I feel sick thinking about it, not because I feel sorry for Riley after everything she's done, but because this is real now. Criminal charges, prosecutors, possible prison. This isn't just family drama anymore. Tommy sits frozen in his chair, staring at the papers spread across Steve's desk. His face looks gray. Steve closes the folder and slides it across to us, saying we should take copies of everything for our records. We'll need them for the civil case we should definitely pursue. I thank Steve and gather up the papers with shaking hands. Tommy hasn't moved. I touch his arm and he flinches like I've burned him. We walk out to the parking lot in silence. Tommy gets in the passenger seat and just sits there. I start the car but don't drive anywhere yet. Finally, Tommy speaks. He says he knew his mother was manipulative, but he never imagined she was stealing from us. All those times we talked about needing to save more money, all those months we delayed our plans because we didn't have enough put away, she was collecting thousands of dollars in fraudulent disability payments. We were paying her rent to live in her house while she billed insurance companies for our supposed caregiver services. Every dollar we managed to save, she was taking more. Tommy puts his head in his hands. I don't know what to say because he's right. Riley wasn't just trapping us emotionally. She was profiting from it, making money off our presence while we struggled and sacrificed and went without things, so we could afford to escape someday. I drive us to a coffee shop because I can't go back to Riley's house right now. We sit in a corner booth and Tommy finally starts talking. He says he's been thinking about all the times he wanted to push harder for us to leave, but didn't because his mother needed help with bills or medical expenses. She always had some financial crisis that required us to stay a few more months, and now he knows she was lying about those too, taking money from us while claiming poverty. I reach across the table and hold his hand. He looks at me with tears in his eyes and says he's sorry. Sorry for not believing me sooner. Sorry for letting his guilt control him. Sorry for wasting 5 years of our lives. I tell him we're getting out now and that's what matters. But I can see the weight of it crushing him. The realization that his own mother has been exploiting him financially on top of everything else. My phone buzzes with a text from Prudence asking if we're okay and if we need anything. I text back asking if she knows any lawyers who handle family financial abuse cases. She responds immediately with a name. Finn Clearwater. Says he's a friend of a friend who specializes in exactly this kind of situation. She'll text me his number. 5 minutes later, I have it. I look at Tommy and ask if he's ready to call a lawyer. He nods. I dial the number. A man answers on the second ring. I explain who I am and that Prudence gave me his contact information. Finn says he has time to meet this afternoon if we're available. His office is 20 minutes away. I tell him we'll be there in half an hour. Finn's office is in a small building downtown. The waiting room has comfortable chairs and magazines that look current. The receptionist offers us water and tells us Finn will be right with us. 10 minutes later, a man in his 40s with graying hair and a kind face comes out and shakes our hands. We follow him into his office. He gestures for us to sit and takes a seat behind his desk. I pull out all the documents Steve gave us and spread them on Finn's desk. The journal entries, the insurance fraud documentation, the calendar marking family departures, everything. Finn spends 20 minutes reading through it all without speaking. Finally, he looks up and says this is one of the clearest cases of family financial abuse he's seen. The documentation is excellent. With the criminal case moving forward, we have strong grounds for a civil suit to recover our losses. Finn explains that we can potentially recover the rent we paid Riley over 5 years since we were there as her supposed dependent caregivers. She was getting paid for our presence while also charging us rent. That's fraud. We can also sue for damages caused by her preventing our financial independence. The job opportunities we couldn't take, the promotions we missed, the interest we lost on savings we couldn't accumulate. He leans back in his chair and says he'd be willing to represent us on contingency. That means he only gets paid if we win a settlement. His fee would be 30% of whatever we recover, but we wouldn't owe him anything if the case fails. Tommy asks what our chances are. Finn says with this level of documentation and the criminal case backing us up, he'd estimate our chances of winning at around 80%. The question is how much we can actually recover since Riley may not have the money to pay a large settlement, but even partial recovery would be something. I ask Finn what happens next. He says first we need to file the civil complaint formally. That will take a few days to prepare, but there's something else we need to do immediately. Finn's expression gets serious. He says Riley will definitely try to manipulate family members into giving her money for legal defense and fraud repayment. She'll use the same tactics she's always used. Guilt, fake health crises, claims that she's being persecuted unfairly. We need to get ahead of that by informing relatives about the full scope of her crimes. Show them the evidence so they can make informed decisions about whether to help her financially. Otherwise, they'll end up being exploited too. Tommy looks uncomfortable. He says he doesn't want to turn the whole family against his mother. Finn shakes his head. He says we're not turning anyone against anyone. We're providing facts so people can make their own choices. So Riley has already proven she'll take money from family members under false pretenses. The journal shows she's done it before. If we don't warn people, she'll do it again. Tommy finally agrees. Finn says we should hold a family meeting as soon as possible. Present all the evidence in one sitting so everyone sees the full picture at once. That way, Riley can't control the narrative by talking to people individually and giving them different versions of events. I text Prudence and ask if we can use her hotel conference room this afternoon. She texts back saying she'll book it for 3 o'clock and start calling relatives. By the time we leave Finn's office, Prudence has confirmed that 15 family members can attend, the same people who were at the intervention yesterday, plus a few others who have heard about the hospital incident. We arrive at Prudence's hotel at 2:30 to set up. The conference room is small but adequate. Prudence has arranged chairs in a circle and set up a projector, so we can show documents on the wall. Tommy looks pale. I ask if he's okay and he says no, but he needs to do this anyway. At 3 o'clock, people start arriving. Tommy's Aunt Caitlin comes in looking worried. His cousin from Phoenix. His brother who drove in from 2 hours away. Other relatives I've met only a few times. Everyone takes a seat and the room fills with uncomfortable silence. Prudence stands up and thanks everyone for coming. She says we have information about Riley that everyone needs to see. Information that explains a lot about the family dynamics we've all experienced over the years. I pull up the first document on the projector. Riley's ER visit history with the dates of family departures lined up beside them. The pattern is undeniable. Gasps around the room. I go through each piece of evidence methodically. The insurance fraud documentation showing $90,000 in false claims. The journal entries detailing manipulation strategies. The garage staging materials for the Saturday emergency protocol. Dr. Kim's medical analysis showing Riley has been stockpiling medications to fake symptoms. By the time I finish, the room is completely silent. People are staring at the wall where the final document is projected. Riley's journal entry about training Tommy from birth to prioritize her feelings over his own needs. Someone starts crying. I look over and it's Caitlin. She's got her face in her hands and her shoulders are shaking. Prudence goes over and puts a hand on her shoulder. Caitlin looks up with tears streaming down her face. She says Riley convinced her to take out a loan last year. Another relative, $15,000 for medical expenses that Riley promised to repay. Riley said she needed surgery that insurance wouldn't cover and that she'd pay Caitlin back within 6 months. Caitlin never saw any medical bills, never got any receipts. Riley never paid back a single cent. When Caitlin asked about repayment, Riley would get teary and say the medical situation was worse than expected, and she needed more time. Now Caitlin realizes there was no surgery. Riley just wanted money. Other people start talking. Tommy's cousin says Riley borrowed $15,000 from his parents for a critical surgery that apparently never happened. His parents are retired and living on a fixed income. They gave Riley money they couldn't afford to lose because they thought she was dying. Another relative mentions that Riley claimed she needed money for prescription medications that insurance wouldn't cover. She showed them a list of expensive drugs and asked for help. The relative sent her $3,000. Now they're wondering if Riley ever bought those medications at all. The stories keep coming. Riley borrowing money for medical equipment she never needed. Riley claiming financial hardship while apparently collecting $90,000 in fraudulent insurance payments. Riley guilting relatives into paying for things that never existed. Prudence pulls out a notepad and starts writing down amounts as people share them. When everyone has finished talking, she does the math. Prudence looks up from her notepad and says Riley has likely defrauded family members of over $50,000 in addition to the insurance fraud. The room erupts. People are angry now. Someone says we need to report all of this to Steve Bailey's investigation unit. Someone else says we should join Tommy's civil case against Riley. Prudence raises her hand for quiet. She says everyone who was financially exploited should absolutely file reports with Steve Bailey. The more evidence of Riley's pattern of fraud, the stronger the criminal case. And yes, anyone who wants to join our civil case should contact Finn Clearwater. We're stronger together than separately. The conference room door opens. Everyone turns. Riley walks in. She's wearing the same clothes from the hospital and she looks small and frail. Someone must have told her about the meeting. She looks around the room at all the faces staring at her. She opens her mouth to speak, but Prudence cuts her off. Prudence stands up and says Riley needs to stop. Just stop. Riley tries again. She says she only did what she did because she was desperately afraid of being alone after their father died. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her family. Everything came from a place of fear and love. Her voice breaks and she reaches for a chair like she's about to collapse. Nobody moves to help her. Prudence's voice is cold. She says their father died 15 years ago. 15 years. Grief doesn't justify a decade and a half of systematic fraud and manipulation. Riley wasn't grieving. She was exploiting. There's a difference. Riley's face crumples. She looks at Tommy with desperate eyes. Tommy stands up slowly. He walks over to his mother, and for a moment I think he's going to hug her or comfort her. Instead, he stops 3 feet away and looks at her directly. His voice is steady when he speaks. He says he loves her, but he can no longer have a relationship with her until she gets serious psychological help and makes genuine amends. Real amends, not manipulative apologies designed to make people feel sorry for her. He says he's moving to Seattle as planned, and she needs to accept that her children are allowed to have independent lives. That having independent lives doesn't mean they don't love her. It means they're adults with their own families and careers and dreams. His voice doesn't shake this time. Riley reaches for his arm, but he steps back. He says he hopes she'll get help, and that someday they can have an honest relationship. But that's up to her. He's done sacrificing his life to manage her fear of abandonment. Riley's hand goes to her chest one more time. She presses her palm against her sternum and her mouth opens slightly like she's about to gasp. Everyone in the room just watches her. Nobody moves forward to help. Nobody asks if she's okay. The silence stretches out and I can see Riley's eyes darting around the room, looking from face to face, searching for the usual panic. She finds nothing. Her hand drops slowly from her chest and she stands there looking smaller than I've ever seen her. Her eyes land on Tommy, and for a second I think she's going to try again, but something in his expression stops her. She looks around at all of us one more time and her face changes. The calculation disappears and what's left looks almost real. She speaks so quietly we can barely hear her. She says she doesn't know how to be alone. Then she picks up her purse from the chair beside her and walks out of the room. Nobody tries to stop her. I hear the conference room door click shut behind her, and then there's just silence. Caitlin is the first one to speak. She asks what we're supposed to do now. Prudence sits down heavily in one of the chairs and says we need to figure out next steps, because Riley isn't going to suddenly become a different person just because she got caught. Ralph agrees and pulls out his phone to make notes. People start talking over each other at first, but then Prudence raises her voice and suggests we go around the room so everyone can share their thoughts. Most of the relatives say they want to participate in the fraud investigation. Tommy's cousin mentions the money Riley borrowed from his parents and asks if that can be part of the case. Steve Bailey's card is still on the table and several people take photos of it with their phones. Caitlin says she'll research therapists who work with people like Riley. She says manipulation and control issues need professional help whether Riley wants it or not. Someone asks if we can force Riley into therapy and Prudence says probably not, but we can make it a condition for any future contact with the family. Ralph clears his throat and says his brother manages a moving company. He explains that given everything that's happened, we probably need extra security for the move. He offers to call his brother tonight and arrange everything for this coming Saturday. Our original timeline. I feel something loosen in my chest when he says Saturday. Tommy reaches over and squeezes my hand. Ralph says his brother can provide people who will make sure Riley doesn't interfere with the movers or try to create another crisis. He'll arrange it all as a family favor. Several people thank him and I realize how surreal this is. 2 days ago, these same relatives were staging an intervention to stop us from leaving. Now they're helping us escape. The next 2 days pass in a blur of packing boxes and making lists. Riley stays with Caitlin, which means Tommy and I can actually prepare for the move without worrying about her sabotaging things or staging another emergency. I wrap dishes in newspaper, and Tommy sorts through 5 years of accumulated belongings. We're ruthless about what we're taking. Anything that reminds us of this house gets donated or thrown away. Steve Bailey calls on Thursday morning to say Riley has been formally charged with insurance fraud and filing false claims. The charges are serious. Multiple counts. He says her arraignment is scheduled for next week after we'll already be in Seattle. He needs us to provide written statements, but we can do that remotely. I write mine that afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by half-packed boxes. I describe every fake medical crisis I witnessed over 5 years. Every time Riley clutched her chest when we mentioned moving. Every convenient dizzy spell that appeared when we had apartment viewings. Writing it all down makes me realize just how much I normalized her behavior. Finn calls Thursday evening and says he's filing our civil case. He explains we're seeking repayment of all the rent we paid Riley over 5 years, plus damages for financial losses her fraud caused. He walks us through the numbers, and it's staggering how much money we gave her while she was collecting fraudulent disability payments. Finn says the criminal conviction will strengthen our civil case significantly. He thinks we have excellent chances of winning a substantial settlement. He'll handle everything, and we don't need to be present for most of the proceedings. He just needs our signatures on some documents, which he'll email tonight. Tommy and I sit on the couch reading through the legal papers on my laptop. Seeing our case laid out in formal legal language makes it feel more real somehow. We're actually doing this. We're actually getting out. Friday morning, I have my first appointment with Valeria Nicholson. Prudence recommended her because she specializes in family manipulation recovery. Her office is in a quiet building downtown, and when I walk in, she's exactly what I need. Mid-50s, kind eyes, the kind of presence that makes you feel safe immediately. I sit in the chair across from her desk, and she asks me to tell her what brought me here. I start talking and don't stop for 40 minutes. I tell her about Riley's fake emergencies and the 5 years of feeling trapped and the constant second-guessing of my own perceptions. Valeria listens without interrupting, and when I finally run out of words, she leans forward slightly. She says everything I experienced was gaslighting. She says my perceptions were accurate all along. She explains that Riley's behavior fits textbook patterns of coercive control and psychological abuse. Hearing a professional validate what I've been thinking for years makes me cry. Not sad crying, relief crying. Valeria hands me tissues and says we're going to work together to help me process all of this. She says recovery takes time, but I've already taken the hardest step by recognizing the abuse and choosing to leave. Tommy starts seeing Valeria too. His first appointment is Friday afternoon while I'm home packing our bedroom. When he comes back, he looks exhausted, but lighter somehow. He tells me Valeria helped him understand the childhood conditioning that made him vulnerable to his mother's manipulation. He says she asked him to think about his earliest memories of disappointing his mother, and he realized he's been trained since he was small to prioritize her feelings over everything else. She gave him homework. He's supposed to write down every time he catches himself making a decision based on guilt or fear of someone else's reaction. Tommy sits at the kitchen table that night, filling pages in a notebook. He shows me some of what he wrote, and it breaks my heart. Things like remembering how he wanted to try out for basketball in 7th grade, but his mother cried and said she'd worry about him getting hurt, so he didn't try out. How he was accepted to a college 3 hours away, but his mother had chest pains, so he went to community college nearby instead. How every girlfriend before me mysteriously caused his mother health problems until he broke up with them. He's seeing the pattern now. Really seeing it. Friday night, Prudence hosts dinner at her hotel for everyone who supported us through this. She reserves a private dining room and about 20 people show up. It feels completely surreal to have Tommy's family celebrating our departure instead of trying to stop it. People bring wine and desserts, and there's actual laughter. Real laughter. Not the tense fake kind from family gatherings at Riley's house. After dinner, people start sharing stories about their own experiences with Riley's control. Tommy's cousin talks about how Riley convinced him not to take a job in another state by claiming she was having heart problems. Another relative describes how Riley managed to disrupt her wedding planning with a series of convenient emergencies. Everyone has a story. Everyone has been manipulated. There's something healing about hearing these stories out loud in a room full of people who finally understand what was happening. Prudence stands up and proposes a toast to new beginnings and healthy boundaries. We all raise our glasses. My phone rings around 8 that evening. Riley's name on the screen. I show Tommy, and he stares at it for a long moment before answering. She asks if she can see him one more time before we leave. Just to talk. Tommy looks at me, and I can see him weighing it. He tells her he'll meet her tomorrow morning at a coffee shop, but Prudence has to be there as a witness. Riley starts to argue, but Tommy cuts her off. Those are the terms. Take it or leave it. She takes it. After he hangs up, Tommy sits quietly for a minute. Prudence asks if he's sure about this, and he says he needs to do it. He needs to face her one more time and prove to himself he can hold his boundaries. I tell him I'll stay home and finish packing. I trust him to handle this without being pulled back in. Tommy and Prudence leave at 9 Saturday morning. I watch them drive away, and then I go back inside and attack the remaining boxes with focus I didn't know I had. I pack our bathroom stuff and our winter clothes and all the random things that accumulate in closets over 5 years. I'm sealing up the last box in our bedroom when I hear Tommy's car pull into the driveway. I meet him at the door, and he looks tired but steady. We sit on the couch, and he tells me what happened. Riley apologized. Actually said the words, "I'm sorry." But then she immediately started trying to negotiate conditions for our departure. Weekly video calls at a time convenient for her. Monthly visits where we fly back here. Emergency contact privileges where she can reach us anytime, day or night. Tommy says he listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he told her he'll consider limited contact after she completes therapy and makes full restitution for the fraud. But he's not negotiating his freedom. He's not bargaining away his life to make her comfortable. She cried and said he was abandoning her. He said no. He's choosing his wife and his future. Those aren't the same thing. Then he stood up and left. Saturday morning, I wake up to my alarm at 6, and for the first time in 5 years, I don't feel that immediate weight in my chest. The moving truck is coming at 8. I get up and find Tommy already in the kitchen making coffee, and we just look at each other for a moment without saying anything. Then we start moving through the house, doing final checks, making sure we haven't forgotten anything important. At 7:30, I hear a truck pulling up outside, and I look out to see a big moving van with Ralph's brother climbing out of the driver's seat. He waves when he sees me at the window. Lucy and Ralph arrive right behind the truck in their car, and Lucy is carrying bags of bagels and cream cheese. She hugs me on the front porch and tells me she's so proud of us for doing this. Ralph starts helping his brother unload equipment from the truck, while Tommy and I bring out the last few boxes we packed last night. The movers are efficient and professional, wrapping our furniture in blankets and loading everything onto the truck with practiced ease. Around 9 o'clock, Prudence pulls into the driveway with a carrier full of coffee cups and a box of donuts. She says she wanted to be here to see us actually leave, to witness what she calls our successful escape after all these years of Riley's control. We work steadily for the next 2 hours, carrying boxes and directing the movers about which items go where in the truck. I'm taping up a final box of kitchen stuff when I see movement at the front door. Riley is standing there in her bathrobe, and she's not clutching her chest or swaying or doing any of her usual performance. She just stands there watching us load the truck. Her face looks different from I've ever seen it. Smaller somehow, like she's finally realized that her manipulation isn't going to work this time. She walks slowly down to the sidewalk and stands there with her arms wrapped around herself. Tommy sees her and stops what he's doing. He sets down the box he's carrying and walks over to where she's standing. I watch as he reaches out and hugs her, and I can see both of them crying. Riley's shoulders are shaking, and Tommy is holding her like she's fragile. It goes on for maybe 2 minutes. This goodbye that feels both sad and necessary. When they pull apart, Riley reaches up and touches Tommy's face the way mothers do, and he lets her. Then he steps back and she drops her hand. Tommy's voice is quiet but steady when he tells her he hopes she'll use this time to get help and figure out how to have healthy relationships with her family. He says it gently, not angry or accusing, just honest. Riley nods without saying anything back. She doesn't make promises or excuses or try to negotiate conditions like she did at the coffee shop yesterday. She just nods and wraps her arms back around herself. The movers finish loading the last of our furniture, and Ralph's brother says we're all set. Tommy and I get into our car and I start the engine. As we pull away from the curb, I look in the side mirror and see Riley still standing there on the sidewalk in her bathrobe, alone in front of the house. Despite everything she's done, despite all the manipulation and fraud and years of trapped misery, I feel this complicated mix of relief and sadness watching her get smaller in the mirror. She looks like what she is, an older woman who destroyed her relationships through control and fear, standing alone because she couldn't let people leave with love. The drive to Seattle takes 3 days, and it feels like slowly letting out a breath I've been holding for 5 years. Tommy and I take turns behind the wheel, switching off every few hours. We talk more than we have in years, really talk about our future and our fears and our hopes for building a life that's actually ours. We discuss what kind of furniture we want for the new apartment, whether we might adopt a dog, how it will feel to make decisions without considering Riley's reaction. We stop at national parks and tourist attractions along the way, pulling over whenever we see something interesting. At Yellowstone, we walk around the geysers and take photos like regular tourists. At Mount Rushmore, we buy silly souvenirs in the gift shop. These spontaneous decisions feel revolutionary after years of every choice being filtered through Riley's potential crisis. We stay in cheap motels each night and eat at random diners, and the freedom of it makes me almost giddy. Tommy seems lighter too, laughing more easily, not checking his phone every 5 minutes like he's waiting for an emergency call. We arrive at our Seattle apartment on Tuesday evening just as the sun is setting over the water. The moving truck beat us here by a few hours, and Ralph's brother has already started unloading our stuff into the building. Our apartment is on the 3rd floor with a view of the street and a tiny balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs. It's smaller than we hoped when we looked at photos online, and the kitchen needs updating, and there's a weird stain on the ceiling in the bathroom that concerns me. But it's ours. Our names are on the lease. Our locks are on the doors. Our choices about who enters our space and when. That night, we sleep on an air mattress surrounded by stacked boxes because the movers won't reassemble the bed until tomorrow. The air mattress has a slow leak, and by morning, we're basically sleeping on the floor. But Tommy and I just laugh about it. We order pizza for dinner and eat it sitting on the floor with paper plates, and it's one of the best meals I've had in years. Tommy starts his remote job the following Monday, setting up his laptop at our kitchen table since we haven't bought a desk yet. I begin my new position at the Seattle office on Wednesday. The office is modern and bright with big windows overlooking the city, and my coworkers seem friendly in that polite Pacific Northwest way. Work feels different here, lighter somehow. I don't have that constant background anxiety about Riley manufacturing a crisis that would require me to leave early or miss important meetings. I can focus on my actual job instead of mentally preparing for the next emergency. Tommy tells me his first week of remote work went smoothly, and his new manager seems reasonable and supportive. We settle into routines, figuring out which grocery store we like best, finding a coffee shop that becomes our regular spot, learning the bus routes. It's all mundane, normal life stuff, but after 5 years of Riley's drama, it feels miraculous. 2 weeks after our move, I'm at work when my phone rings and it's Steve Bailey. He tells me Riley pleaded guilty to the insurance fraud charges as part of a deal with the prosecutor. The terms include mandatory therapy sessions twice a week for at least a year, 5 years of probation with regular check-ins and full restitution of the $90,000 she defrauded from insurance companies over 5 years. She'll avoid jail time if she complies with all the conditions, but if she violates probation or fails to make restitution payments, she could face up to 3 years in prison. Steve says the mandatory therapy was actually his suggestion to the prosecutor, arguing that Riley needs professional intervention more than incarceration. He thinks she's genuinely mentally ill rather than just malicious, though he admits the systematic nature of her fraud makes that a complicated question. And I thank him for the update and for taking our case seriously. After I hang up, I sit at my desk for a while processing this information. Part of me wanted her to face harsher consequences, but another part is relieved she'll be getting help. That evening, Finn calls with an update on our civil case. He says Riley's attorney reached out indicating she's willing to settle rather than go to trial. They're proposing a payment plan where Riley pays us back most of the rent money we paid over 5 years, though the emotional damages are harder to put a dollar amount on. Finn thinks we can probably recover around $40,000 total, paid out over 5 years to match her insurance restitution timeline. It's not everything we lost, not even close when you factor in the opportunities we missed and the years of psychological damage, but it's something concrete, an acknowledgement that what she did was wrong and costly. Finn says he'll negotiate for the highest amount possible and make sure the payment schedule is enforceable. I tell Tommy about both calls when he gets home from his evening walk, and we talk through how we feel about it. We decide we're okay with the settlement if the terms are solid. We don't need to drag Riley through a trial. We just need to move forward with our own lives. 3 weeks after we arrive in Seattle, Prudence texts asking if she can visit for a long weekend. She flies in on a Friday afternoon and we pick her up at the airport. We spend hours that first evening sitting in our tiny living room talking about our childhoods and recognizing manipulation patterns we'd both normalized. Prudence tells me about times Riley convinced her she was selfish for wanting to go to college out of state, or made her feel guilty for getting married and moving away. She describes her wedding day and how Riley had a mysterious dizzy spell right before the ceremony that nearly derailed everything. We compare notes and realize Riley used almost identical tactics on both of us, just customized to our individual guilt triggers. Prudence says she started seeing a therapist in Phoenix who specializes in family trauma, and it's helping her process the revelation of Riley's systematic abuse. She says the whole extended family is slowly working through it too. Some relatives are angry and feel betrayed. Some are in denial and insist Riley just made mistakes out of love. But everyone is changed by what came out. The family dynamics will never be the same. The following week, Tommy finds a support group for adult children of manipulative parents that meets Thursday evenings at a community center near our apartment. We go to our first meeting nervous and not sure what to expect. There are 8 other people there, ranging from their 20s to their 50s, and when they share their stories, I'm struck by how similar the patterns are. Different details, different specific manipulations, but the same core dynamic of a parent who can't let their children be independent. Hearing other people describe experiences so close to ours makes me feel less crazy and less alone. The group facilitator teaches us strategies for maintaining boundaries and recognizing when we're falling back into old guilt patterns. She explains that recovery isn't a straight line, that we'll probably struggle with guilt and doubt for years, maybe forever. But she also says it gets easier with practice and support. Tommy and I commit to attending every week. On the drive home from that first meeting, Tommy reaches over and takes my hand. He says he thinks we're going to be okay, that we're doing the right things to heal. I squeeze his hand back and tell him I think so too. 3 months pass and I start to feel like a real person again. Work becomes something I look forward to instead of something I dread leaving early because of another emergency call. Tommy's remote job is going well, and we actually have money in our savings account for the first time in years. Then a letter arrives from Riley's therapist, forwarded through Finn's office. The envelope sits on our kitchen counter for 2 days before Tommy opens it. Riley is asking for supervised phone contact, and her therapist has written a separate note confirming she's making genuine progress in treatment and taking responsibility for her behavior. Tommy stares at both letters for a long time before showing them to me. We talk about it during dinner, then after dinner, then lying in bed that night. He wants to try, but he's scared she'll pull him back in. I suggest he do the call with Valeria present so she can help him process it. He agrees and schedules it for the following week. The day of the call, Tommy is quiet and tense. We drive to Valeria's office together and I wait in the lobby while he goes in. The call lasts 40 minutes. When he comes out, his eyes are red, but his expression is calm. He tells me on the drive home that Riley apologized specifically for the journal entries about training him to prioritize her feelings. She admitted she didn't understand how damaging her behavior was until her therapist explained coercive control. Tommy thanked her for the apology, but told her he needs more time before committing to regular contact. She accepted that without arguing or making demands. It's the first conversation they've had in years where she didn't try to manipulate him into something. A month later, my boss calls me into her office and I spend the entire walk there convinced I'm in trouble. Instead, she offers me a promotion. More responsibility, better pay, a small team to manage. I accept and float out of her office feeling like maybe I'm actually good at something. That same week, Tommy's company offers him a raise because his work has been consistently excellent. We celebrate by going out to dinner at a nice restaurant. something we never did when we lived with Riley because we were always saving every penny for escape. Over dessert, we start talking about the future in a way that feels real instead of impossible. Maybe we could buy a house in a few years. Maybe we could travel somewhere we've never been. Maybe we could even think about having kids someday. These are dreams we couldn't even say out loud when we were trapped. Finn calls in early November with news about the civil settlement. Riley has agreed to pay us $42,000 over 5 years. It's most of the rent we paid her plus some additional damages for the financial manipulation. It's not everything we lost, and it doesn't account for the emotional cost, but it's enough to make a real difference. We put half in savings and use the rest to furnish our apartment properly. We buy a real couch to replace the secondhand one, a good mattress, kitchen equipment that actually works. Small things that make the space feel like ours. 6 months after our escape, we decide to host Thanksgiving dinner. Prudence flies in from Phoenix, and we invite some new friends we've made through work and the support group. It's only 8 people total, but it feels significant. We're building something based on healthy relationships and mutual respect, instead of obligation and guilt. Prudence helps me cook, and we laugh about how neither of us really knows what we're doing. Tommy sets the table with actual matching plates we bought ourselves. During dinner, people share what they're grateful for, and Tommy says he's grateful for the freedom to make his own choices. I squeeze his hand under the table. The day after Thanksgiving, a card arrives in the mail. Riley's handwriting on the envelope makes my stomach clench, but I open it anyway. The message inside is simple. She's grateful we're doing well, and she's continuing her therapy work. No guilt trips, no demands, no manipulation, just a straightforward acknowledgement. Tommy reads it twice and then puts it on our refrigerator with a magnet. Over the next few weeks, I notice him looking at it sometimes with an expression that's sad but peaceful. He's mourning the mother he wishes he'd had while accepting the one he actually has. As we get close to the 1-year anniversary of our move, Tommy and I spend an evening talking about how much has changed. We still have hard days when the old guilt patterns surface. Sometimes I catch myself making a decision based on fear of someone else's reaction, instead of what I actually want. Sometimes Tommy starts to apologize for things that aren't his fault. We're learning to recognize those moments and choose differently, supporting each other through the ongoing work of healing. Valeria says recovery isn't linear, and we'll probably struggle with these patterns for years, maybe forever. The difference is now we can see them for what they are. We're planning a trip to visit Prudence in Phoenix next month. We're also talking about eventually having Riley visit Seattle, but only under clear conditions and boundaries that we'll set and enforce. The relationship may never be what we once hoped for. Riley may never be the mother Tommy needed. We're building something real and honest instead. A life where we're free to make our own choices and celebrate our own successes. A life where we can breathe without waiting for the next manufactured crisis. Some days that freedom still feels miraculous, like something we have to remind ourselves is actually real.